How can technology improve your mental health practice? Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It podcast by SafeTalk. I am your today's host, Shafkat. If this is your first time here, let me give you a bit of introduction. In Let's Talk About It podcast by SafeTalk, we talk about mental health and everything related to mental health. In our previous episode, we have had licensed counselors and therapists who have spoken about how to get started with therapy, how to maximize the benefit of therapy. We have spoken about ADHD, autism, data privacy, and many, many more. If this is the kind of content that you are interested in, please feel free to check out our previous episode and subscribe to our channels on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Today's topic is about the role of technology in mental health. How can technology improve a mental health practice for a therapist or a counselor? Technology has many implications. It can be good and it can be bad. So today we're going to look at how technology has changed the industry of mental health. What are some of the tools that everybody can use to improve their practice? And lastly, we're going to talk about the future of technology and where do we want to see going. This is a topic that's personally very interesting to me because my background is in technology, and for the last few years I've studied and learned a lot about mental health. But I'm not going to be blabbering for 1 hour straight about my opinion on technology and mental health. I have a very special guest with me in the studio today, and the guest is Sara. She's a co-founder of Cara and also a licensed counselor. Welcome to the studio, and thank you so much for joining this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me here, Shaf. This is such an awesome opportunity, honestly, to be able to talk about, you're absolutely right, a really interesting topic. And it's also something that's really dear to me, just because coming from a background of like business marketing and going into this industry of mental health and going, wow, there's so much to be improved on here when it comes to how we can make things more efficient. And so technology really was the answer for me in my practice at Cara. And I'm so glad to be able to have this conversation with you, as we've always done for over the years, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we have a lot of things that we can share that everybody will find beneficial as well. As you said, we have spoken about this so many times. Mm-hmm. I want to give you a bit of introduction about you so our listeners know your background. You already mentioned you come from a background of business, but also you are a licensed counselor as well, but you're also a co-founder of Cara, which is a mental health center. If for those who are, have seek therapy or know anything about mental health, probably have heard the name because you guys are one of the biggest centers in Klang Valley, I would say. And also very important is that you actually have been taking a big part in SafeTalk's journey. I remember when SafeTalk was still an idea, I came up to you and I introduced the idea to you and you gave me so much incredible feedback. So I always appreciate your feedback about tech, and also I think that's why I would say it's good to have you.
Likewise. And I think, I still remember the day you decided to come to me and talk about the idea, and it was such an exciting idea as well. And I remember us talking about it over Starbucks, was it? And just having such a deep conversation about the kind of spaces we could go into. And I'm so proud of you and the team for where all of you have come to this day, the way that SafeTalk it is now, and so much more coming its way as well. I'm so excited, and I'm so glad to be part of the entire journey with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's you wouldn't have gotten where it is today without your help. I've always said that, and I'm saying that again. Thanks. Okay, so another thing also I want to add, since we've spoken about all the technology so many times, I know at Cara, I would say you are the champion of using technology in mental health. We at SafeTalk, of course, we do a lot of research, what's happening in the industry and about mental health centers. A lot of them still use very old school, old-fashioned way of using WhatsApp text to make appointments. But I know at Cara you use what is the latest booking tool? Not talking about SafeTalk, but even before that.
SafeTalk is a game changer.
And I also remember this example that we just spoke about. At one point, you showed me that you use this virtual room to make meetings with your team and all, and that was so incredible. So it's so amazing, how you actually do use, and instead of, there are a lot of people who would say that technology is actually bad, right? That it can, harm in some way the human connection or many things, which some of them are true. But I also also appreciate the fact that you embrace it, and move forward with it, because I'm sure there's a lot of benefits that come from it too.
Absolutely. The benefits are endless. But you're right, there are definitely some costs to it as well. There's some concerns, and I think they're incredibly valid. And I think in my point of view, it's a good thing that we think about the concerns, the challenges that comes with it, because it is important that we manage risks, and that comes with everything that we do, right?
True.
Yeah.
Definitely, of course. We will get into that. There's going to be a lot of questions I'm going to throw at you about that. So, but before, just to kind of set the stage, to say here, as I already mentioned, technology gets a lot of good and bad reputation, right? If we talk about, for example, certain things like ordering food and all, technology is so convenient. You can just go on your phone, order food gets to your house. You can order everything online. That's very convenient. But there's also a lot of people who kind of give it a very bad reputation, right? Especially when they say it spoils the human interaction, or kind of gets in the way of that. A lot of kids use technology, and a lot of older generation complains about that a lot, like myself. So my question would be since you work in the mental health industry, what's your opinion? What's the role of technology in mental health as of today?
Well, there are a lot of studies that have shown, the use of technology, social media, all of that, how that affects our mental health. And of course, to a certain degree, it will affect negatively, but it also positively affects our mental health in so many ways. And I think with everything that we do, moderation is key. I suppose that's the answer to it. Technology has given us this avenue where mental health therapy is more accessible. Information about mental health is widespread now. I mean, especially with pandemic and things like that, anything that happened after that, we have people talking about mental health like never before. And I think that's all thanks to the existence of technology, the people being more open to embrace technology. So it's there, despite the negative talk, despite the worries. And as long as it's regulated, people use it in moderation. Right. We still go outside and touch grass. It's fine. And it can coexist. And I do see that coming into play in the mental health industry as a practitioner or as an individual who's utilizing therapy services or trying to up our game with our mental health. All of that technology has a place in it, in assisting us with the processes. And information transfer is amazing because of technology. It's not like back then where it would have taken us forever before we could have spoken to one person about their mental health and what we could do for them. Or technology having apps nowadays where you could just have that assistant on your phone. We didn't used to have that, and now we do. So it's huge, honestly.
True. I think that's a very, very important point, that it's the moderation. I think it whether it becomes a good or a bad thing, it completely depends on how you use it.
Yeah.
And all, if you use it wrongly, of course, it can be a bad thing. Otherwise, you mentioned about especially how COVID, the lockdown, changed a lot of things. So I want to touch on that, in mental health, because I know you were in the industry even before COVID. So how usage of technology has changed before and after?
Right, that's a great question. So I think before COVID-19 happened, a lot of the processes were still very much manual. So we were using a lot of paper, so much paper for documentations. Therapy sessions were all in person, physical spaces. There were obviously online therapy being done in some pocket spaces, but not a very common thing in Malaysia. It's not something that we had here. Not like therapy was a very common thing either before COVID happened. So the whole idea about therapy back then was just sort of you imagining what it's like in the movies, and that's just kind of the image everyone has, And then when COVID happened, it's just sort of like, well, we can't do the physical space. Now it's not that easy to do that anymore. Filing more papers and printing more papers and doing the manual booking systems and calling clients, that wasn't really something that was as conducive. And so, right through the pandemic, everyone adjusted gradually. And I think, as at Karakara, we were one of the first early adopters, I would say, to kind of go, hold on, this makes no sense. Let's get technology into place. How can we transfer our services online? How do we make things more efficient and automate things as much as possible? And I think now, after we came out of the pandemic, it's like, oh, more people are adopting it. They're more open to embracing it. Online therapy is in high demand. And you see that globally. You see people talk about mental health through social media a lot more now, because during the pandemic that was a big topic, like everyone was talking about it, and suddenly now it's become the norm. It's like, do you go for therapy, like you should be in therapy, that kind of thing. That's the norm now, and we see that everywhere.
True.
Honestly, the pandemic has changed everything for us.
It is even for myself as well. When meetings before pandemic were like, hey, let's go meet somewhere, and I remember after that, like, we even became lazy. We were like, just like, can we just do this online, that I don't have to travel 20 minutes or something. And I'm sure that kind of like, once people realized that therapy can be done online, I think that it's the same thing, like, especially if it's so much traffic jam or so much inconvenient to get from one place to another.
Absolutely. And I think in the Klang Valley alone, we have a lot of therapy centers still concentrated in the same area, and that meant that a lot of people living outside of the Klang Valley couldn't access therapy.
Right.
But now, since we had online therapy, we have clients from all over Malaysia, from like all the way the tip of Perlis all the way to Sabah. We have clients everywhere. We have clients globally, and it's so much more accessible now because online therapy is available. Not to say that we don't have physical therapy, that there's no space for that. In-person therapy will always be an incredibly important sort of space, but with online therapy, we've expanded that reach, and people get the help that they need. And they get the conversations, the community that they didn't get before this. It was so much more isolating, ironically enough.
Right.
When it was limited to a physical space. But with online, despite you sort of being at home, there's this connection to someone else outside of your own home, with the comfort of your own home. It's a game changer, honestly. And I think not just us being willing to adopt, like therapy and incorporating that, it's also the client's willingness to be open to that. And I think we see that so much with like the younger generations, like millennials, Gen Zs and all that. Like, we're so used to having that, and it was a bit of a bigger challenge with the older generations, understandably so. So I think I'm just really glad that we are in that direction now. We're moving towards it.
It is. It's true. It's so right. Especially the access part, as you mentioned. Like, it's this is so amazing. I think everybody who, counselors, whoever works in this industry, they're trying to make it more accessible. There's so many organizations, and I feel like technology can actually help. Make that much faster.
Absolutely.
So that is incredible. Okay, so you mentioned that, like, so online therapy is one of the biggest changes that has happened before COVID and after, right? But is there any area where technology is lacking that you feel it could be better?
Technology is lacking. I think not just the technology itself, but I think the education surrounding technology, like how we use it, that is still severely lacking, because a lot of, not just therapists, not just clients, but people in general may not know how it can benefit, may not know how to use it, because you're just not familiar. And that's where a lot of the doubts and concerns come up, right? Because you would always fear what you don't know.
Right.
And I think having education, improving our tech literacy is something that we need improvements on. And then it's just sort of like we don't really have that right now, unfortunately.
True.
Yeah.
And I'm sure one of the biggest, I would say, areas that people need to be educated on is data privacy. That's, I would say, the biggest concern in one of the biggest concern in mental health or healthcare in general. Because when we were in traditional hospitals, it was much easier to keep that data safe. But when we move these things online, it becomes a lot more complicated.
It does.
Right? It's a lot harder to keep data private in an online environment where our lives are shared on Instagram and Facebook and so much more. So how can, like, mental health professionals navigate this? What are, like, some steps that they can take besides being educated? Or maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think education and training is the top priority here. Like, how do we understand how data is being stored? How do we keep them? How do we erase them safely? Things like that needs to be taught, because we don't learn these things in school. And unless you go get a degree in it, in IT and stuff, you don't really learn about these things. And so for the layperson, it's just sort of like, I may intuitively know certain things, and then I don't for the rest of it. And I think with our team at CareCare, like, we always talk about, like, these things are important. We need to make sure we safeguard them. These are all the procedures, and then we will update the SOPs again and again. Lots of training, and then we have support. And I think that important thing is whatever technology, whatever platform that we choose to use, it's not just understanding what it's all about and the risks, but also having a really good support team behind the scenes to be able to educate us, to be able to kind of help us if there's any kind of crisis or there's any problems that kind of come up. And I think with SafeTalk as well, it's just like there's so much data that we are, having to use in order to manage our entire practice. And it's thanks to your team. You need to have been amazing with the customer support, honestly. Like any minor issue, and we're just like, help, and then you're just like, I'm on it, we're resolving it ASAP. And I think that offers so much assurance because we know that the risk is mitigated because we have a really awesome team behind the scenes who feel very responsible in all of this and would actually do the right thing behind that. True. And so that part is there. When we talk about like HIPAA compliance, I think when you came up with this whole thing, you were telling me, but I was just like, is it HIPAA compliant though? And you had to go through this whole research, I remember. Right. I think you're the best person to talk about that, honestly, with HIPAA compliance. Yeah.
True. We first of all, this has slowly turned into a SafeTalk commercial, so thank you.
But it is true that SafeTalk has been the core of my practice at this point. Our team's just been like SafeTalk every day and night.
Sure. But I do remember when we started, that was like one of the most important things for us, at least as you said, for us, the most important thing to do is because we are not counselors, we are not therapists. All we can do is provide a platform for those who want to use it, and especially educate as well. We actually, one of our first episodes for this podcast that we did was about data privacy, and I was sitting on the guest chair at that time
as you would.
and explaining all of that. But that's good. So data privacy, of course, is important, and as you mentioned, it has to be not only done by the therapists themselves, but everybody else has to work together, like technology companies, so to educate back and forth, so it can be improved.
Absolutely.
When everybody works together, right?
And it's also sort of like the legal arrangements as well, so of having this understanding and documentations to know that, whatever platforms we use, the data that the companies store are they have all these kind of risk management in place. That they are guaranteeing how the data is going to be handled and things like that. And similarly, our arrangements with clients, when they come on board to get services from us, they know what technology is being used, what they are signing up for. And so the informed consent is super, super important. And that is extended not, just from the informed consent for what the therapist does in therapy with the client, but also the technology involved, like how would be the telehealth platforms that we use. We're talking about the booking system, the data management, everything. And so clients are informed about that, black and white, verbally, and they decide if that's a risk they're willing to take. They decide, how is data being stored and managed, and they get to have a say. I don't want this anymore, and I'm not comfortable with this, or I have concerns about this, how can you navigate that? There is always this two-way communication that we can have with our clients, and I think that gives that assurance across the board, end to end, and I think that's so important in order to uphold that sense of like we have privacy and confidentiality being a important consideration throughout.
True, that's true. And as you mentioned earlier, I just want to kind of touch on that point of HIPAA compliance. It's I think it's a very good system that can actually set up a good standards of how to protect the data. I know it's not legally bindable in Malaysia because it's mostly in US and Australia and New Zealand recently apparently too. But what we have done, at least, we have copied that framework and implemented it here. So if one day, maybe similar rules comes in Malaysia, we'll be ready in place.
Yeah, because that's sort of the gold standard right now, and that's why we also follow that, even if it's not formally in place yet, because we're still a very young industry. Mental health in Malaysia, it's still young. Everyone's trying to figure things out, and we kind of have to look towards the countries that have already set this in place. And that's why for us, when we decided, we want to go online, we want to incorporate tech, it's just like, what are standards out there? HIPAA compliance, what's that? Let's figure it out. Let's see what we can do about that, and sort of know we can at least tell our clients that this is something that we have prepared ourselves for and future-proofed it, if you will. And then just sort of constantly testing to make sure that things are still safe. We're all right. This is not working as well as it should be. So let's fix that. Let's change things. And I think through all of these different methods put in place, that's how we kind of navigate all these concerns of privacy and all that.
True. If it's going that direction, the future of technology in mental health looks very good.
I hope so.
Okay, so we touched a lot on data privacy, right? That's one of the biggest concerns, or I think something that everybody should think about, especially in practicing mental health in online environment. The second thing would be is the quality of care, right? You spoke about online therapy. I'm sure having it in person is different because you can read facial cues, you can read body language and so much more. But a lot of that could get lost when you do online therapy, right, on a video call, because the video could be bad quality or something like that, right? And how can does it affect the quality of care technology or no?
I wouldn't say it affects significantly. And there's difference, no doubt. And I think everyone who's gone through standard Zoom meetings would have already noticed that to some degree. And I think even with our experiences, like I remember we would joke about this in our therapist, like I can't tell when a client's crying as quickly as I could if it was in a physical space. Because on camera, I can't tell when the tears pull up in your eyes, the kind of thing. Like you can't catch that fast enough. Whereas in person, it's just like I see it, I see the shift, and I know that's the moment. This is a really intense, important, deep moment. But on camera and with the lag, sometimes it's a sort of like, oh, I missed it. I missed that moment. It does happen, It's undeniable that there will be some drawbacks, but I wouldn't say it's affected it significantly where we couldn't provide that same level of quality of care. And it didn't take away the client's experience either. For some of them, if anything, being able to have therapy in the comfort of their own room, the safety of that private room is so much better than going out into a physical space that they are not familiar with and having to be so vulnerable. So some people like that, some people don't. And I think it's a matter of how we as therapists sort of be aware, be mindful of these differences, and then sort of navigate that, have those discussions with clients. Or in the example that I just gave about knowing when my client's going to cry, it's just sort of going slow with the process and then realizing it and just sort of pausing it and just going, okay, wait, sorry. I'm not sure if my camera's showing me the right things. What's going on over there? Could you just sort of talk me through your feelings, And so we don't make that assumption that sometimes people might make because they think they're reading the nonverbal cues accurately. So this also forces us to change our strategy and our approach a little bit more to suit the online therapy space rather than use the same techniques and apply that across the board for physical and online.
I see.
So I think that's worked wonderfully and people have been really responsive to it.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I definitely did not know about that. And honestly, as you mentioned, like the benefit that the accessibility that technology gives to mental health, I think outweighs whatever little compromise that has to be made. But even as you said, even there's not really a compromise because you found a different way around it and work around that.
Yeah, you kind of make the most of it. It's so important to adapt. I think rather than stick to just one specific way, like that's not how life works. We have many strategies to tackle any problem, and it's just kind of figuring out what can we do with what we have right now, and how do we make it better.
True, that's great. Okay, so we arrive at one of my favorite questions here. I hope I don't pressure you a lot with this. What is the one area of mental health that technology should stay away from?
I think one of it is definitely this thinking that technology can replace a human in therapy. Because, I know AI has been amazing getting there, and you could have technology sort of emulate the sense of empathy and connection and all that with someone, but it's never really the same as what we can offer as humans, at least for now. I don't know, ask me again 50 years later, right? But at this point in time, the empathy and connection that you can get from a human it's still very unique, and it's incredibly important in the therapy process. So technology should not, to me, kind of try to take over and be the primary option of care, but rather just being supplementary.
Right.
Honestly, so that's definitely one thing. Trying to be human when it isn't, and sort of the other area of over automation is just sort of like.
Right.
With like I like being able to use things like automatic responses if someone emails us or sends us a DM, and then we just go automatic messages addressing everything from the chatbot to that. It's convenient, no doubt, but then when it gets too automated throughout the entire process, it almost feels like, well, am I even talking to anybody here?
Right.
Even with a simple question of like, how much do you charge? Where are you guys located? And it's just sort of like all you get are automated responses all the time that can be really isolating again, and so I don't think that's an area I would like to see technology going into too much, and that's why everything in moderation and balance that comes in.
Right. True. I think that the example that you mentioned at the end with a chatbot and automatic replies, it applies to so many industries. I have had personally that experience where you like use this chat bubble in the corner of a website, and the responses are like, I could have read your FAQ. I didn't need to
Yeah, and if you ask a question and it doesn't fit the script, and then they don't give you the answer, I'm like, so that's not, you're not there yet, are you?
Yeah, that's true. Then too much automation can be a harmful thing as well.
And I think when you said harmful, it comes to mind like diagnosing, because there is potential for technology to be like, okay, I'll just do the assessment and then give you the results, and that's it. So anybody in the you and I can just sort of have technology, AI, give us a diagnosis of what's going on. And it sounds like that's more efficient or accurate, but probably not, because now it becomes an over-reliance on technology to do the diagnosis. And usually diagnosis involves not just objective assessments, but also subjective assessments. So my fear is sort of like having that grow, like, technology being in the realm of diagnosis where everyone starts self-diagnosing and just like, I have an app, I paid for it, got the assessments done, and it tells me I have like 10 different disorders, and that must be true, and that's it. And then just do that and take away from it and walk away with that kind of knowledge unhelpfully, and instead it's a lot more harmful, because you still need someone to have that subjective assessment and conversation and things like that to really understand what's going on, and instead of just like a 1 + 1 is 2 and that's it.
True. That's very, very important. I think I've kind of always believed in this as well. And to the point in SafeTalk, we say digitizing mental health the right way. That's our tagline. That means that we don't want to nothing can replace the human connection.
Love that.
But rather, how would we do this? How can we create this foundation that can help just enhance the areas that are very boring and repetitive, but that can even enhance that human connection that's in the therapy, part of the therapy.
Love that. This is why I love working with you guys.
Thank you.
You understand that value, how it supplements the entire process. Absolutely. Rather than we're going to take over the world.
No, we don't want to do that. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's a very interesting, honestly, points that we had about general role of technology in mental health and how can we navigate it. As you said, moderation, I guess, would be the key word here, is the most important thing. And you have started Karakara in 2019.
2020.
2020, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody starts a new center or a new practice, right, there's so much that they have to think about, right? For example, setting up their own website, setting up a booking system. It's like you can either do it like just figure it out as you go, or you can set up everything first and then go like head into it, Or what are some important considerations to make when like setting up initially, your practice?
I think a cost-benefit analysis is needed for anybody who is setting up a practice, and I think depending on the size of the practice as well. I think when we started, it was a very small team. And now our team has grown to over 30 people, and it's a very big team, and things shift. So depending on where you're starting, the considerations vary. So most people here, I think, would start with a small practice first. It could be solo. It could just be with a couple of peers in the industry. And I think then it's sort of like looking at cost, obviously. How much capital do you have? In order to think about what sort of platforms and softwares and apps and all that kind of stuff that we need in order to enhance the practice. But not just if we can afford it, we have a lot of money, that's great, we can just get everything, but
Right.
then do you need it? And do you know how to use it? So that goes back to my previous point about like education and training
Right.
is important. Like, don't try to use something that you're not confident about, that you don't know about, or you're not able to learn how to use it, because you can't be, sort of like distinguishing what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. Is this safe or is this not? Just because a company says they can do all this doesn't
Right.
mean it's a good thing, and do they have the right support and things like that. So being really critical about all of that is so important in terms of analyzing what's needed.
Right.
And then it's just like, how much resources do you have in the team? I think when we started, it was just a lot of like, I think me learning everything. And I at least had some knowledge and background from where I came from, that I knew how to do all that. But there was still a lot more to learn and a lot to set up. And it's like if it's a one-person setup thing, it's still a lot of work.
Right.
And having to figure that out. But then when you grow a team, and it's just sort of like, do you have people who can take over those roles and continuously provide that support? Because it's not just like we have it and then we're done.
Right.
It would just do its thing and let it run. Like, we're not there yet, but hopefully that would be the case, at some point, where a lot of things become so integrated in the system that you don't really think too much about it, other than obviously sort of like regular maintenance and sort of checking and testing and stuff like that. So all those things need to be considered, I think, when figuring out what does someone need when it comes to setting up their practice.
Right. And of course, it can reach the point where it can become counterproductive as well, right? Because if, let's say, as you said, like some technologies take some time to learn. They have a learning curve, right? And if you're going to, let's say you're about to start your practice and you're going to spend 3 months just studying different softwares, which one you use, that can be very, very bad. Is there any like tips, or like how would people make sure that they don't fall into that pitfall, I would say? Yeah.
I think starting small would be great. And I think there's no harm in sort of combining traditional practices that, they're a bit more manual, but you're familiar with it, you know what to do with it. And then sort of going, okay, well, what's one thing that I can change, that I can depend on a technological tool to sort of like help me with that. And then just sort of like venturing that bit by bit, and then sort of eventually turning the entire ecosystem in your business in one where it's like mostly automated or technology assisted. I think even for us, like, with doing this for 4 years now, I wouldn't say everything has is automated or has technology written all over it. There's still a couple of things that are still quite manual, just because we are limited by costs, we are limited by human resources and time, and it's just sort of picking our battles and going, well, it's in the pipeline, that these are things that we would like to see change. These are things we want to invest in and stuff like that. It's going to be there, rather than being overly ambitious about it and going, I want to start with a blank slate and start with like everything being perfect. Because then it would take forever before you would actually start anything, or you wouldn't even know what's suitable for you and what's not. So I think for me, number one thing is definitely start small, pick and choose what you can work within your capacity, and then go from there, and eventually the effort will be worth it over time.
Definitely. But so what would be like the 3, let's say, if 1 to 3 tools that everybody who gets started must have?
Well, having a telehealth platform, definitely, to do online therapy, if that's something that they would offer. It's so accessible, so many options, and everyone's familiar with it. It's a no-brainer. And it definitely is a scheduling system. SafeTalk would be great. But there are a lot of options out there as well at different price points. And I think it's sort of something that's so common that a lot of industries have already incorporated it. And I don't see why the mental health industry can't. It makes everything so much more efficient, makes life easier for both clients and therapists and everybody to manage bookings and things like that. And it's not something where the tech is too new. It's been there, and it's just about how much better can it be. That's it, really. So I think bare minimum that should be in place.
True. And so, as you mentioned, there's so many tools actually. Like, thank you for highlighting SafeTalk in this point. I appreciate that. But there is, as you said, there's so many tools. It just depends on how advanced, I would say, do you want it to be, right? Because I'm sure there are free tools that you can just set up very quickly, and even they will do the job. Will they do what you want them to do? Probably not, but they'll do the basic stuff. So you kind of research find out what works for you, and that should do the bare minimum job
Absolutely.
until you decide this is not enough anymore, and
Yeah.
then move on to
Yeah. Yeah, and I think
next
it's
level.
not like technology is so foreign to the point where everyone's still using pen and paper all the time. I mean, I would hope that there are a lot of people out there using even just Google Calendar,
Right.
and just sort of keying in your appointments and stuff.
Right.
That's really just sort of like the baseline here, and you kind of go from there and go, well, is there any other options instead of me coordinating schedules with my clients and just have them knowing what my availability is like and just schedule that in. That's really basic, honestly, at this point.
Very true.
Yeah.
Another thing I might add on that, I would think having your website, correct me if I'm wrong, I would think is very important. Not because I feel like having your own website or like a web page can kind of build credibility, right? Because I know a lot of like therapists or counselors promote their services on social media, right? Would be Instagram, TikTok is becoming very popular for that. But it's good that people can go to your profile and read a bit. But when they still see that you have your own website, it kind of uses like a plus 1 point. I'm not sure if it happens in mental health, but in our industry, it works a lot in IT. It's very
Definitely. And I think depending on the target audience, I suppose. So I think with a lot of people who are with clients who are comfortable with using technology and they use social media and websites and things like that, they would naturally look out for that. It's just that there is a credibility that you have a website. You're here to stay. You're not just someone who set up an Instagram page and just go, I sell therapy, and that was the end of it. I think the bare minimum, and definitely you're right, is at least having a website. It doesn't need to be fancy, but it does need to be still user friendly. Something that gives you just the right amount of information that you need. Because some people rely a lot on social media, Instagram, TikTok, and then they deliver that information there and they boost the credibility there. No doubt that's still possible. But if you really think about it, the social media pages are still websites.
Right.
Having an online presence, I guess, is what is important, no matter what. Even if you don't have a fancy website, but you just have a booking page that only says your availability, very basic information, your pricing. Enough, honestly. I think most people would be open to that and they would see the value in that because you have other materials supplementing that on the social media page.
Right, true.
So for us, it's like we have a website. We developed that whole thing, make sure all the information that's necessary is on it, and then we still have social media to sort of support a lot of that. We have a booking system that makes things efficient because without it, people will be trying to email us or WhatsApp us and things like that to make bookings. So it's a whole system really that needs to come into place. And I think it's actually very accessible for a lot of therapists. It's not difficult. It's no longer difficult, I think.
It's not. Like nowadays, there are like website builders. I mean, as you said, you can get more advanced with it and build your own, do your own design and all. But if you just want to get started, start with bare minimum, right? Whatever suits. And at that point, you can use kind of templatized websites. And there are services that kind of can cost from cheap to almost like very little amount to get your own website, and or even, as you said, like social media as well, to kind of use maybe Canva to design your social media post if that's the channel that you want to use to reach out your clients. So it's easier than ever to get started.
It is. Children can create lots of stuff now, so why not adults? But of course, like I said, it's the literacy there.
Right.
That's the concern. So if it's just basics, I think a lot of people, at least in those in urban areas, are definitely able to set these things up. Those with less exposure, less access to such tech may have that challenge, no doubt. And I think that's definitely an area that needs to be improved on, and we are always mindful of that. Like we can't access certain populations because of that. But for the ones that we are able to access, it's a big win. And I think for a lot of therapists who are in urban areas, they are able to access these sort of basic forms of technology to really enhance the practice and reach more people.
Right, true. Okay, what about, let's say, once the basic stuff are done, somebody has had the practice for a year or plus, and now these are not sufficient anymore. What would be like the next stage after that?
Oh my goodness. Honestly, we're talking about like technologies that already exist, and it's just sort of not something you find common and incorporated in practice. I think for us as well, we were thinking about we would love to have mobile apps that would actually help us have clients kind of logging in day-to-day symptoms and things like that, and lots of stuff that we want to measure, and then be able to access coping strategies, for example, instantly. So they exist, but do they exist within our ecosystem? Not yet. But can it be in the system? Absolutely. And I think that's the future. That's the sort of like slightly more advanced than, although in the grand scheme I think it's not, but within the industry it is more advanced. To have in the palm of your hand these things to sort of track data and then give you feedback and having technology assist the therapists and the clients in terms of how they can better manage their mental health.
Right.
Definitely one of it. And another one I think for therapists would be having if we could record our sessions with clients' consent, of course, and just sort of being able to automatically transcribe what goes on in sessions, and then as a therapist I can analyze that so much easier. What was going on, what were the words being used, and how were our emotions, like our facial cues and all that kind of stuff. That's something I really want to see being incorporated. It would enhance the quality of care so much more.
I understand. Of course, it's and I think with whatever happening these days with technology, we are like probably a few steps away from that happening already. And what's becoming very popular right now is AI.
Yeah.
Right. Everything is becoming AI nowadays. AI can do this, AI can do that, and AI can take over your life very soon as well.
Yes.
So, do you use AI for your practice in some ways, or?
In some ways, like ChatGPT is great,
Right.
and everybody's using it at this point. And I think I do see room for it to be part of like even automating billing systems, scheduling and all that. That definitely has space for it. But honestly, we haven't been able to adopt that yet. Again, due to limitations and resources, which, as I said, start small and one by one, right? But I definitely see that going in and sort of even with the chatbots that I mentioned earlier, sort of being really careful and figuring out where that could sit within the interactions with clients without taking away the human connection, but going, well, some things can be automated because I don't want to have someone being a 24/7 rep and support that just of answering these things, or having AI within our team for training and things like that, so that there's anyone who needs support with the tech itself or with whatever, AI is going to be there to assist rather than human me, human you.
Right, I understand. I think it's kind of coming back to the first point that AI should be there, but it shouldn't be in more like a support system, not rather to replace the therapist or the person, but just be there to support, because it has so many applications. It can do so many things, and I'm sure if it's placed in the right way, it can actually help enhance the therapy process a lot. Is there any specific AI tool that you would like to see implemented in the future in mental health practice that you could think could benefit a lot?
That's a very big question. I mean, like what I mentioned is now with like transcribing and stuff like that. If it's to the point of also monitoring everything with facial cues, not just the words that we use, and matching that data with data analysis and predicting that data as well. I think AI can definitely make space for all of that.
Right.
And then being able to say, well, to the therapist going, okay, these are suggestions for interventions and treatment plans. These are things that can be done. These are things that have been analyzed based on past history and all that kind of stuff. And going, these are the recommendations. And then for the therapist, human therapist, to go, yes, no, what would I want to take from it? And just sort of like that speeds up the whole process and probably captures details that humans probably wouldn't have caught it fast enough, because we don't have time to look at that kind of like every session, spend hours analyzing it, but AI can do that for sure.
That's true. I think as much as I believe in technology, I think we are just a few steps away from that happening, unless it's already happening and we're not aware of it.
It's just not being used in that way. Even with VR and stuff like that as well, like that's been incorporated to some degree for exposure therapy, but more research needs to be done, safety measures need to be in place, but the potential, endless.
True. We're just, I think, only how long it's been, 2 or 3 years into this AI technology development. So I think a few more years and it will be ready. But I do agree at this stage we need to be careful, because a lot of things it's not properly tested. It probably doesn't have sufficient information yet. It could potentially do some damage. Probably not, but it could.
It could.
So we need to wait for it to kind of stabilize, to become maybe much better, and then I think it can be used for the applications that you've mentioned.
Yeah,
That'd be
absolutely.
great.
So exciting.
I know, right? The world of technology is so exciting, and
It's always changing.
it is. So I think that's kind of the end of conversation. I want to just thank you one more time for sharing all your thoughts and opinions and so many tips you shared about how for new therapists to get started. I hope somebody who listens will find that beneficial. All right. So thanks again, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad we had this conversation. I think I'm glad we had that space to talk about it as well. And I do hope, those who are listening who are considering therapy or who are considering starting up their own practice would actually, learn something, like you said, from this conversation we had then, and maybe SafeTalk as well. And
please use SafeTalk.
Yeah, so game changer.
Okay,
but yes,
absolutely.
technology is the way to go, and I really hope we see
is.
that integrated so much more.
Absolutely.
I'm excited.
Thank you. Awesome. And that's how technology can improve your mental health practice. And this is where I conclude. So thank you for everybody who listened to our podcast. If you would like to get to know more, or if you're seeking for therapy, please find Kara on Instagram. They're quite active, and also you can find them on their website to make appointments and bookings as well. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. We post monthly episodes about different topics of mental health, and I'm sure there might be something useful for you in there. And that's all for today. Thank you so much. I'm your host, Shafkat, and have a good day.